Thank you. You should be able to see the screen now.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Good. So we have heard a lot about activities, technologies that have been created for the use of big data. But one important element is, of course, still that we are able to train people, for instance, in national statistical offices, to make use of all this information. That's why we're having also a task team on training, competencies, and capacity development that looks at all of these aspects. So I'm going to say a few words about what this task team does. We right now actually have 4 different main work streams in our task team. The first one relates to curriculum development, which also includes the development of guidance on training development. We have a big data competency framework developed. We have a big data maturity matrix for national statistical offices that is available now. And we are working on a big data training catalog. So what are we doing in these 4 different areas? When we talk about curriculum development, we are talking about providing a basis for consistent development of training courses. What has happened, of course, in the past a lot is that we have developed a new methodology, we have written a handbook and all kinds of technical aspects, and we try to do the training by having one session trying to go through all the aspects of this book, which is typically not possible. To really have the maximum impact now on the training sessions that we want to conduct, we have to identify a number of things. What is the general big data competency area that we want to address, including specific competency areas like classification algorithms. So we're not only looking at training, for instance, on Earth observation data or on the use of Earth observation data or on the use of mobile phone data, but we also have to have specialized training on specific steps in this process. We also have to look at the job behavior. So what is the person actually expected to do in the different steps that can be identified in the different areas. And we have to clearly identify what is the learner or the persona that will take these training courses. This could, for instance, be senior managers or project managers or data scientists. And we have to admit that for each of these different groups, these different persona, the information that is needed for them will be different. That also means that training courses for these different persona need to be different to really maximize the impact that we can make. We also have to look at the instruction level. So is it really just a foundation course to raise awareness, that people understand what is in general known on the use of this new technology? What are the key factors? Do we have to provide an intermediate or even an advanced training course that really looks at very detailed and often more technical aspects of all this process? So all these considerations are linked to the competency framework, which I will mention in a few minutes. And we are looking at a clear setting of learning objectives in this process. We had in our task team a number of discussions now with other task teams to define the competencies needed and to develop the corresponding curricula with the considerations that I just made. We have called these rapid needs learning analysis sessions, and I think a few of the speakers have already referred to those, that we have used this basically to formulate the curriculum for a specific training course on, for instance, AIS data and on mobile phone data. But this was done for a very specific course, a very specific type of persona at a very specific instruction level. So this process will continue in coordination between our task team and the other task teams to develop in the end a whole set of training activities that put together will actually enable the development of necessary skills in people and in statistical offices. So when we're looking at this development of guidance for the course development, which is part of our work now, we're not only looking at defining the learning objectives, we're also looking at how do we actually make this happen in terms of an actual course, for instance, that is being developed. So we're trying to also assist other task teams in this process. And that includes very much practical aspects of course delivery as well. We're organizing right now. It will start, I think it's next week, and then go on for another 6 weeks, drop-in or coaching sessions for the other task teams that will cover aspects such as the selection of the most appropriate type of training delivery, the information architecture that we want to use in our training course, the tone and wording to reach the audience precisely, what kind of use of videos can we make, how can we produce them with the resources that we have, what different forms of activity building exist in, for instance, the learning platform that we are running on the global platform. And of course, assist then the task teams in the construction, importing, and selection of activities in the course. How can this actually be done so that a lot of the activities become more flexible for the task teams to use? So a lot of this is, of course, then based on the Big Data Competency Framework that was developed as a general guidance on building big data skills. We know that to use, acquire, process, and use it in official statistics of big data requires an extensive set of skills and knowledge. And we have tried to use this extensive, even though it's not yet exhaustive, set of skills in the Big Data Competency Framework. We can basically also say that this Big Data Competency Framework looks at the skills that an individual must have to be successful in the use, in applying his already existing skills in the use of big data at different steps in the production process, which we'll look at in a minute. So that recognizes, of course, that different statistical officers will run different projects. Not everybody is going to use, for instance, Earth observation data for the same purposes. It will require different types of data specialists. You may need a data analyst, a data engineer, a data scientist that requires different compositions of skills and knowledge. And we also have to admit that not each data specialist must possess all of the skills listed that we have in the framework. That goes back to a comment that I made earlier, that we are really trying to create trainings that are specific to individuals and to the skills that have to be developed, and not just dump everything into one course and people will have to figure out what are the elements that they can use from there. In this whole process of developing this competency framework, we have looked at two different approaches. One was the competency areas approach, where we look at core competencies and generic or soft skills. But we have also looked at it from the other side, from a statistical production process approach. Many of you may be familiar with the GSBPM. We are using a simplified version of that. When we look at the competency areas approach, we have identified core competencies, such as ethics and privacy, statistics, programming, machine learning, and so on. And for each of those dimensions, we have identified sub-dimensions and given descriptions on what are the different skills that are needed and how do we measure the level at which a person actually is in their work on acquiring big data knowledge. So all this information is in the competency framework. It includes also generic soft skills, even though they are not the main focus of the framework, but they're indispensable and an inherent part of big data competencies. So this will span all stages of the statistical production process, and we are working now also on including these skills and identify also training steps that actually highlight and advance some of these skills as needed in the different process of moving forward. The simplified production process approach that we have chosen really looks at the use of core competencies and generic soft skills in the production process. The simplified version is just to look at data acquisition, data processing, data analysis, and data visualization, not all the subcategories that we may find there in the GSBPM, because not all of them may actually be fully applicable to the use of big data. When we link this, of course, we also see that all the different core competencies and generic skills that we have apply in different ways to these different steps in the production process. And that makes the competency framework actually useful in identifying a learning path for individuals on their way to acquire big data skills. And I'll say something about that at the end of the presentation about the learning path. The second or third major output that we have is the maturity matrix for statistical officers. The maturity matrix is a self-assessment tool for the statistical office to determine where it is now and where it wants to be in its way on acquiring the skills and the capacities to use big data. In this maturity matrix, the statistical office actually will set its own target. So we're not describing what an office has to achieve, because again, this will be different from one office to the other based on their needs, based on the applications that they want to use. In this maturity matrix, through a set of questions that we have developed there, answering those questions, the statistical office will be provided with a picture of where it currently stands in its big data journey, looking at several dimensions. For instance, legal and policy framework, the IT infrastructure, human resources, which is not only IT skills, but actually human resources and many other aspects where also the soft skills come in, and of course the actual application. And a lot of the things that we talk about or have talked about in the past when we talk about big data are actually the application component, the actual application dimension of this maturity matrix. But there are these other dimensions that are very important to have, otherwise we may have the technical skills of doing something, but will not be able in an office to actually use big data for the production of official statistics. So the maturity matrix, by answering these questions, any gaps will be identified, and they can then help to inform a strategic plan for the statistical office. The online version of the maturity matrix that is being developed will also provide a list of training resources that then can be used to bridge existing gaps in this process. So the results could look like this. So we show on the screen then where the office is, where it wants to be, and for the gaps we actually identify or list a number of training resources. This can be courses, but can be also other training materials that are available to bridge this gap and reach the target that the statistical office has set itself. The last thing I want to mention is our work on the big data training catalog, because the competency framework, the maturity matrix, and also the curriculum development are supported by this development of a big data training catalog. This includes training courses and other training materials on many different aspects. We have looked at, I'd mentioned quite a number of different competency areas, skills, dimensions in the maturity matrix. For each of these elements in the matrix that was shown earlier, we need a different type of training. So what we're trying to do is really now to identify the training courses and materials that have either been developed by the committee of experts on big data, our task teams, or by other entities. So our task teams are not big enough to do training for everybody on all aspects. So there are many other sources out there that we want to include in this catalog. So this will, of course, support also individual development. The statistical office, through the maturity matrix, can identify where it needs to develop capacity to bridge these gaps, but it then needs also individuals that have the actual skills to make these steps from the lower to the higher education level in these different elements. So the online catalog basically will provide a searchable list of training courses, but it's not only that you can search for the training course by its name and certain types of description. There are a number of criteria there, but you can also set up a learning path for an individual, which then can be linked to the work in the maturity matrix where the NSO actually needs the skills of that person. So this really then allows you to set the different goals. You determine where you are in the process, what are the skills that you want to develop, and based on this, we will be able, through this big data training catalog, to actually give you a list of recommendations of training resources that exist, that can be used to move forward in acquiring these skills. So these are the few things that I wanted to mention for our task team. So it's 4 different elements right now. We are looking, of course, also in connection with this at evaluation procedures, so that, for instance, we also know whether certain courses that are already running or that have been developed actually have the impact that we want to achieve. We'll try to provide feedback then to the developers to improve the quality of these courses and make them more efficient in the future. Thank you very much. The link here is the link to our task teams, which is just a subset of the Big Data website on Unity. Thank you.